This is a pro-Hamas. It's a
Mm,
pro-Hamas
good point.
platform. Hamas is an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas share an ideology. And the Muslim Brotherhood, as it's established in Britain, wants to establish that ideology in Britain. So the party that is just formed, led by Jeremy Corbyn, is not pro-Palestinian. They don't give a hoot about the children in Gaza or in Rafah.
No.
They want to Islamize Britain.
Yes.
That's their goal. And that, they're not talking about if you're a political party in Britain, why on earth would you go to these great lengths to establish a political party in Britain because you want to look after the interests of people thousands of miles away? No, you guys, you need to wake up and start to educate yourself on who these people are and what they want.
I want to talk about you because most people will know your story, which is absolutely inspiring. But for some of our viewers who don't, it is worth pointing out that you have such authority to talk about these issues because you were born in Somalia. You admit that you were very much part of radical Islam. In fact, even though now you're probably the woman with the most fatwas on your head in the world, you actually supported the fatwa against Salman Rushdie when you were growing up. But you were de-radicalized after moving to, or before emigrating to Europe. So you have very much seen this from both sides of the coin. And I think 9/11 was a key moment, wasn't it, in terms of your de-radicalization process?
So I don't have an authority to talk about these things because I was born in Somalia. I am like, one of many, many voices who's looking at these developments that we're living through. And I'm taking the position that I hold through part experience and, of course, part scholarship and part through observation, like all of us. And the part that's through experience is I was a member of the Muslim Brotherhood as a teenager when the Muslim Brotherhood came into my school in Nairobi, Kenya, and convinced me and my peers that the way we practiced Islam was all wrong, and that the way we should practice Islam is the way they introduced us to practice Islam. And what they brought to us was very, very intolerant. I mean, throwing gays off rooftops. I don't remember seeing any gays around me at the time, but the fact that they needed to be thrown off rooftops is one of the things that they taught us. And they made us aware of how corrupt and evil Jews are, likened them to monkeys and pigs, and said that, they had to be eliminated. All of these, I got steeped in all of this along with my peers through the Muslim Brotherhood activism. And so when I see them setting up shop in various European and American cities, I know what they're teaching. And of course, I look a little deeper than the general public too. I look at the books, the sermons, look at their websites, the message that they're trying to get across. And it is very, very similar to what they were feeding into the hearts and minds of my peers and me when I was a teenager. So, watch out for the Muslim Brotherhood, watch out for what they teach. And it's effective. People start acting on it. And I remember acting on it too. That is why I joined a demonstration to ban Salman Rushdie's book, Satanic Verses, without ever reading it, without ever setting eyes on it. And I think this is what Westerners do not understand. If you have young people who are seeking direction and a meaning and a purpose in life, and they find that in their religion, and they find religious leadership that tells them this is how to practice your religion, they start doing that, especially young men. And so it's not that young men are spontaneously turning their backs on British values. It's because they are told to do that. And then when you have open borders and you keep getting large numbers of people, especially from Muslim countries, and the only group that's active enough that's drawing them into the mosques, drawing them into these Muslim centers, are members of the Muslim Brotherhood that are turning their heads. I mean, it is interesting to see that you'll find so-called moderates or non-practicing Muslims that come from Syria and Afghanistan, then get radicalized in British mosques and other European mosques, then you know that you're doing something wrong. And so this is what I am observing, and I know that it's going to lead up to no good. The fact that we have the Al-Shabaab linked to Al-Qaeda, it is a militant force in Somalia. In 1985, in the 1980s, something like that was unthinkable. Most Somalis would say, no, we don't do that. That's the sort of thing that Arabs do in the Middle East. But we are not Arabs, we are Somalis. And yet, when you have these madrasas that get the opportunity to indoctrinate young hearts and minds, they get them to act like they got people to join Al-Shabaab, to join ISIS, to join Al-Qaeda, to join Hamas. This has happened over and over and over again. Why would it not happen in Europe? It has happened in Europe. We've had several terrorist attacks. There are lots of plots that today are being foiled. There's a huge number of people that the intelligence officers are following. So the problem is happening here. But let's not just focus on the violent aspect of it. Let's also focus on the rest of their agenda, which is the Islamization agenda, which is to change neighborhoods so that they're Sharia compliant, to get young women to be shamed to the point that they cover themselves. They don't want to cover themselves, but if their whole neighborhood changes, it's like, well, I wouldn't be able to live in this house, this neighborhood, unless I become like them. Look at these developments and look at them through the eyes of people like me and people who've come from the countries that we are fleeing. We're fleeing these countries because of Sharia law, okay? And so you have to, as European decision makers, European media, European politicians think, we don't want this sort of thing to develop here. If we're going to attract immigrants to Britain, then we're going to select for those people who will be a part of our economy, a part of our culture. We don't seem to have any problems with, say, the Indian communities, the Hindu communities, communities that come from Brazil, Latin America. Why is it that we seem to have problems almost exclusively with the Muslim communities?
And the thing is, it is happening already in London, Ayaan. I used to live in Whitechapel. There are now parts of Whitechapel, East London, that do practice Sharia law. I know that for a fact. I've spoken to the people who've been in the mosques and have been de-radicalized. So it is going on, even though the politicians try and tell us that it's not. And to talk about it makes you far right. But I will talk about the political solution in just a moment, because you were obviously a big part.
I think we should. It doesn't make you far right. It makes the politicians deniers, and it makes the politicians incompetent. And I think
weak.
Weak and corrupt. And I think that it is important then for citizens to stand up to their politicians and tell them off and say, don't call me a xenophobe, don't call me a racist. You are the denier. In fact, you are the racist, because politicians, by denying these problems or either giving into them, are expressing the racism of low expectations. They simply don't think that Muslims are capable of rising out of this level of fanaticism and barbarism. And so they give in to them and they say, yeah, Islamophobia, okay, you can have it. Sadiq Khan was talking on this video to Keir Starmer about legislating Islamophobia, basically introducing censorship. And Keir Starmer should say to Sadiq Khan, no, I'm not going to do that. This is a liberal society. We don't censor our people. That would have been an expression of courage. But he didn't do that because obviously he wants the votes.
Well, yes, because there's a big challenge politically to Labour on the left from sectarian Muslim politicians. And in fact, I don't know if you realise this, but they have now actually formed a party in the UK led by Jeremy Corbyn, the former Labour leader. 5 of them were elected on a pro-Palestinian platform, and it was Labour who they beat in those seats. So there is a clear political threat. And
don't call it pro-Palestinian. We keep framing things the wrong way. This is a pro-Hamas. It's a pro-Hamas platform. Hamas is an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas share an ideology. And the Muslim Brotherhood, as it's established in Britain, wants to establish that ideology in Britain. So the party that is just formed, led by Jeremy Corbyn, is not pro-Palestinian. They don't give a hoot about the children in Gaza or in Rafah.
No,
They
brilliant.
want to Islamize Britain.
Yes.
That's their goal. And that, they're not talking about if you're a political party in Britain, why on earth would you go to these great lengths to establish a political party in Britain because you want to look after the interests of people thousands of miles away? No, you guys, you need to wake up and start to educate yourself on who these people are and what they want.
Oh my goodness, I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. And I want to talk about the political solution through the prism of your experience in the Netherlands, where you emigrated to, and you were an early ally of Geert Wilders, who has, of course, become far more powerful in the decade since you left the Netherlands to move to the US. But still, the establishment does all it can to shut him down. So can you talk to me a little bit about your experience with Geert Wilders and what you think his political movement in the Netherlands can do now? But first, it's the best time of year. Football is back. We're talking Premier League in the UK and in the US, NFL Sundays and college football Saturdays. With that, the glorious kind of fantasy football lineups is back too. So it's where your inner manager comes alive, setting the perfect fantasy roster, screaming at your TV and making last-minute waiver moves that either make you a hero or the guy everyone ridicules in the group chat. But listen, while you're over here making sure your fantasy team is dialed in, don't let your personal grooming become the guy that gets left on the bench, because let's be honest, nobody wants to fumble their grooming routine. So that's where Manscaped's Performance Package 5.0 Ultra comes in, acting as your all-in-one grooming playbook. From keeping things sharp down below with the Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra to taking care of those rogue ear and nose hairs with the Weed Whacker 2.0, this is the lineup that'll keep you looking and feeling like a champ on and off the field. It will help you feel clean, confident, and ready to dominate your fantasy league. The Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra Groin and Body Hair Trimmer is the franchise player of your grooming roster with precise trimming capabilities. It's reliable, efficient, and gets the job done without fumbling. Whether it's for a date night, weekend tailgate, or just everyday grooming, this is the tool you want on your squad. And no one wants a surprise nose or ear hair making a guest appearance on game day, right? So look at this. The Weed Whacker 2.0 handles those details like a pro, keeping you neat and ready to go. No missed tackles in your grooming game. And 2 free gifts today. The Boxers 2.0 Midnight Bravo and the Shed 2.0 Toiletry Bag Premium Gear to ensure you're always ready for action, whether at home or on the road. So join the over 10 million men. I'm one of them who trust Manscaped, and get ready for kickoff by heading over to manscaped.com. All you need to do is use the code Outspoken, that's at checkout, and you'll get 20% off and free shipping. Trust me, you'll be drafting the real MVP of grooming this season. So 20% off and free shipping when you use the code Outspoken at www.manscaped.com. Stay on top of your grooming game and be ready for anything the season throws your way.
Geert Wilders and I were both members of the VVD caucus. That's when I first met him, and I have seen him active within that caucus. This is back in 2003, 2004. And even back then, the major issue, polarizing issue, was this unwanted immigration with all its negative consequences in a small, densely populated country like the Netherlands, where you can't avoid problems. And it was the rise of this type of Muslim Brotherhood Islam. And Geert Wilders within the caucus would say, we have been elected to put a stop to this and to pass policies that assimilate those who are already here in the Netherlands and have border policies that keep out those whom we don't want. Now, the VVD caucus, which is an establishment party, like all the other establishment parties in Europe, would say, we are also members of the EU. And so EU membership meant that you really didn't have, as a nation state, the last word on your borders. So you have like many establishment parties in countries that are members of the EU, it would be, we don't have the last word on our borders. Another big issue at the time when I was serving with Geert Wilders was the accession of Turkey to the EU, which Geert Wilders opposed and said that's going to mean floods and floods of immigrants from Muslim countries. And he used to say it's not Turkey that's going to become a part of the EU, it's the EU that's going to become a part of the caliphate. And obviously using that language put Geert Wilders into trouble. I would say at the time, the language he used was used against him as this is not how members of parliament speak. But language aside and trivia aside, he was onto something. He was listening to voters. He was talking, he was articulating the problems of immigration, the intolerance of Islam. I mean, I was walking around since 2002 with bodyguards provided by the Dutch government, and so was he. And Theo van Gogh was murdered on the streets of Amsterdam by a young man radicalized in a mosque or in mosques in the Netherlands. These are the problems that he was highlighting.
Yes, and
the establishment just to clarify, would respond by calling him, me.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, just to clarify for people who may not know, Theo van Gogh obviously was the director of the film Submission, which you were behind, and his murder, which was an act of terror, also involved his killer threatening you. So you have been at great personal threat now for 2 decades.
Yes, and not only was I in great personal threats, anybody who highlighted and articulated the problems of the presence of radical Islam in the Netherlands was a victim of these threats. And for some of us, it was more intense than others, but the threat was always there. And that's also one reason why I think a lot of people simply shied away from talking about these problems was they felt it was an immediate threat to their lives. And what we now call cancel culture, back then we used to call political correctness.
Yes.
So it wasn't just a threat to your personal life, it was also a threat to your career and your reputation, because if you spoke about these things, the establishment punished you as being a racist and xenophobe and intolerant towards immigrants, etc. And what happened was there was the approach that Geert Wilders was taking, which is what he wants to implement now. This is selective immigration, which was to shut down these mosques and madrasas and so on that are now entrenched. And the other side was, no, we have to accommodate, we have to be accommodating. And the argument that would be used would be, look at what we did to the Jews in the lead up to the Second World War. We don't want to repeat that kind of intolerance. So the Muslims were treated as if they were the Jews of the 1930s and as if they were living through that period, which is a completely false comparison. And even more aggravating, because these Muslim radical Islamist leaders in the mosques and in the madrasas were calling for the elimination of Jews, for calling Jews monkeys and pigs, saying, dehumanizing Jews in every way, shape, and form, making life in Amsterdam and Rotterdam, where the Jews live, really impossible for them, and calling for the elimination of the state of Israel. So you had this irony where this incredibly intolerant force that is anti-Semitic was being protected, quote unquote, in the name of what we may have done to the Jews in the 1930s. And Geert Wilders was obviously calling all of this out. Geert Wilders is a huge supporter of Israel. So fast forward, he did stay in politics, and he started winning elections. To this day, the last election that he was held, his party was the biggest, but the establishment is just not going to have him. So he, even though being prime minister of the Netherlands rightfully comes to him as leader of the largest party, they simply will not tolerate him. So they have a civil servant, some obscure person who didn't campaign, who didn't win the elections, to be prime minister. And I just, like many of you, I'm looking at the Netherlands and thinking, is he really going to succeed in implementing the policies that the people want? The largest majority of Dutch who elected him want him to implement these policies. Is he going to be able to do it, or is he going to be stopped from doing it?
Well, he will
and if
be
he's stopped from doing it, what's going to happen?
Well, he will be stopped, won't he, by the globalist blob, as I call them. Thank you so much for watching Dan Wootton Outspoken. Please do subscribe if you want lots more clips and interviews like that. Plus, if you want to watch our totally uncensored after show, then visit www.outspoken.live.